With baseball season about to start, I'm actually donning a baseball jersey for this pre-recorded episode of the Mike to New Haven podcast. I'm doing this on a Tuesday morning. It's one of my days off from work. I'm off tomorrow as well. You'll hear this on a Friday. For those of you can't see it, but it's retro. I'm actually a diehard Yankee fan, but I love my 90s jerseys. This is a Kenny Lofton Cleveland Indians jersey. Kenny Lofton, of course, who should be in the Hall of Fame, by the way. I don't know why he's not. Hell of a player, one of the best leadoff hitters of his era. Of course, primarily started with the Indians in different stints, 92 to 96, 98 to 01, and then one last run in 2007. So if you haven't checked out the previous episode, that was, again, I'm doing this on a Tuesday, so at the time it was recorded the previous day on a Monday. Joe Badalamante, a friend of mine who came back for part two. Joe did 20 years in the New York City Police Department, 1985 to 2005. And I came back on to talk about a form of therapy that really helped him after some recent tragedies he endured in his personal life in terms of coping. So it was a good mental health centered episode geared towards first responders. And that's a theme we've been touching on quite a bit lately. But as you know, it's funny, as I've talked about before, and I'll introduce my guest momentarily after we run a couple of advertisements. This used to be a sports program before it shifted primarily to talking to first responders. It used to be a dedicated sports program. My very first guest was Mike Francesa when he was getting ready to leave WFAN the first time. And that was a theme we kept for a bit before that shift. So I like to go back to my roots every now and then, and we will. But first things first, a word from my buddy Bill Ryan, retired NYPD detective and leader of the Ryan Investigative Group. The Mike to New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike to New Haven podcast. A word, too, from our friend Vince at Armor Tuff, and then we'll introduce our guest. When it comes to firehouses, the floors take a beating. Boots, waters, tools, apparatus traffic, it just never stops. That's why departments like the Gloucester City, New Jersey Fire Department and so many others trust Armor Tuff Flooring and Tile. From the hallways to the training rooms to the apparatus bays, Armor Tuff delivers a clean, professional finish built to handle the daily grind of the job. Durable, seamless, and designed specifically for high-demand public safety environments, this isn't just flooring, it's infrastructure you can count on. And it doesn't stop at the floor. Take a look at the Groves Gear Racks, built with integrated security features to protect turnout gear, personal equipment, and department assets. Secure storage, smart design, and built to last, because your gear deserves the same protection you provide to your community. If your department is ready to upgrade its space from the bay floor to the gear room, reach out to Armor Tuff Flooring and Tile, built for the fire service, built to last. Thanks to Billy and Vince. As always, you'll hear from Granite State, our friends over at that company, right before the rapid fire segment. We'll do their advertisement a little bit later. All right, my next guest has spent more than 5 decades making sports more than a scoreboard. He was a cultural touch point, a shared language, and a story worth telling. An Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, a New York Times bestselling author, and one of the most recognizable voices if you grew up in New York City or in the New York City metropolitan area. On both television and radio, he's covered Super Bowls, World Series, the Olympics, and every major moment in between. And he has helped shape how a lot of Americans, particularly those in the New York area, have consumed sports over the years. So it's cool for me. Grew up listening to him, of course, over the years on different radio stations, primarily WOR in recent years, and a lot of the work he's done outside of that. And that is Mr. Len Berman, who I invited on a whim. And thanks for being so gracious with your time.
Well, sounded good. I've been off the radio for about a year, so I was looking for something to do. So I thought you doing your podcast was a great gig. So there you go. Hey, let me ask you, in your opening montage, I was trying to see some of the faces you had who've been on your show. Was one of those faces that zipped by John Miller?
It was.
Wow. That's a great get. John, that must have been a tremendous show. Did you talk about his interview with Bin Laden?
I did, yes. Bin Laden, of course, he was that was the last Westerner that Bin Laden spoke to. In 1998. What a guy. Yeah, John was so that was a number of years ago. John was episode 100. And a quick little side on that. John, I got him. We share a mutual friend in the form of a retired member of the NYPD bomb squad, Detective Kevin Berry. And it was Kevin that put John and I in touch. And John did that interview while he was still working for the NYPD. So that was a great show.
He's
really enjoyed that episode.
The best hire CNN ever made. He's doing a terrific job. I worked with him at WNBC TV.
That's right.
And people don't realize he's a very funny guy.
He
has this stern police delivery. He would walk up to John Gotti and say, "Hey, John, what's doing?"
Yeah.
And Gotti would, on camera, Gotti would say, "You behaving, John?"
That's right.
Hilarious stuff.
Absolutely. And we'll talk about some John and the other personalities you got the chance to break bread with over the years at NBC. But first things first, growing up in Queens, primarily in the city, that time it was different when you were coming up. Baseball was king back then. Football had its place. Basketball wouldn't get popular until a little bit later. But tell me about just growing up a Queens kid and the passion that you developed, I should say, for sports very early on.
Well, here's the interesting part. I was a Yankee fan. I was a Mickey Mantle fan. That was my Yankees were in the World Series every year. So that was the sport that really meant something to me. The kids in the playground would listen to Giants football on a Sunday because the home games were blacked out. So they'd be listening to the radio, listen to Marty Glickman, who I got to know, became a mentor of mine. But and a friend of mine said, "You got to go to a hockey game." So I went to the old Garden to see hockey, and I thought it was great because you had 2 halftimes, and that meant 2 chances to buy ice cream. There were 3 periods, so I loved it. Hockey was interesting. Hockey's better in person than on TV. But I was basically a baseball fan, so I wasn't really a sports fanatic. In fact, when I got to Syracuse University and went to the radio station, they asked me if I wanted to do a sportscast, and I absolutely said, "Gee, I can do that." I didn't think I could. Yeah, I thought you had to be like an expert, or the people who were doing the sports news on TV back when I was a kid were former football players for the Giants. They were Frank Gifford and Pat Summerall and Kyle Rote. They were doing the local TV news sportscasts. And so I thought you had to be a genius or something. And now, as you and I know, any idiot could be on the air. Yeah, look at us.
Don't sell yourself short. Len Berman's our guest here in the Investigative podcast. And what's fascinating about the era that you were growing up, you mentioned baseball. Baseball's my first love too. And I'm New York across the board. Yankees, Knicks, Giants, Rangers. Those are my teams, respectively. But growing up, you didn't just have the Yankees at that time. The Giants hadn't left yet for San Fran. The Dodgers hadn't left yet for Los Angeles. So this is well before the Mets, who would come along in '62. But if you grew up of a certain age, you had 3 different baseball teams in one city to root for. So naturally, how could it not be king back then?
Well, I'll tell you what an idiot I was. I was Yankees through and through. Mm-hmm. I hated the Dodgers. I know that's a strong word. I told my parents, I never drive me even into the borough of Brooklyn, because that's how much I hated Brooklyn and the dot. And I regret that, because my brother and father would go to one Ebbets Field Dodger game a year and one Polo Grounds Giants game, and I never did. And I regret that. But I told that story to Duke Snyder. And I said, I just hate him. He said, he was charming. He said, well, not everyone can be both.
And think about the athletes that at one time you had in one city. You mentioned Mantle. You mentioned, of course, DiMaggio and Berra, Duke Snyder being one of them, Jackie Robinson, Pee Wee Reese, Willie Mays. We had, quite a number.
Yeah, Willie. I thought Willie was the best player I ever saw. And, they used to have this dopey argument when I was a kid. Who's the best center fielder in New York, the Mick, Duke, or Willie? Everyone, I knew it was Willie. Mickey knew it was Willie. It was just, I guess it was a fun argument. But, I was a Mantle hero through and through. I was at the last game in Yankee Stadium in the 1956 season. And Bob Shepard got on the PA and said, I guess he said Al Kaline only had 1 RBI or whatever. So consequently, Mickey Mantle has won the Triple Crown. And, hello. That was it was just different times. That's all. But I was Mickey Mantle through and through. So one of my greatest thrills, of course, was getting to know the Mick and becoming somewhat friendly with him. And it was very special to me.
Absolutely. I can imagine. So as far as going to Syracuse has a very rich broadcast history. Yeah. You look at some of the alumni. Perhaps the best example is Bob Costas. and all that he's been able to go on and achieve in his career. He's back now, of course, doing the NBA on NBC, maybe even MLB on NBC coming back pretty soon. You went there as well. You got a BA out of there in 68 and a master's in 70. So as far as their sports program, assuming that's what you went there for, tell me about those years and how you really honed your skills during that time period.
Well, I did, but don't make the assumption that that's why I went there. By the way, it's not just Bob. It's Marv Albert, Dick Stockton, yes. Mike Tirico, Sean McDonough, Ian Eagle. You want me to keep going? I mean, it was Syracuse has. It started with Marty Glickman. He was the first. He was the granddaddy of them all, and the first, although Kurt Gowdy was as well, first kind of athlete who turned announcer. Marty was a great track and field star and football player. There's a famous story about the 1936 Hitler Olympics that I urge fans to look up. Anyway, I went to Syracuse to study engineering, of course, because my parents took me to some aptitude testing. And they decided, because I was good at math and science and because I had an introverted personality, this is what they said, that so I majored in engineering. About the first day I got to Syracuse, I don't know why I walked into the radio station, and at the campus station, it was closed. It wasn't open yet for the year. So I came back when it was open, and I said I wanted to try out to be a disc jockey. And they said, well, everyone wants to do that. Would you like to read the sports? And that's basically how it began. And as I mentioned earlier, I didn't know I could do that. And then there's a weird confluence of events, but all the upperclassmen kind of got thrown off the radio station because they had a party in the newsroom. My God, can you imagine? They had a party in the newsroom, and therefore I was able to become sports director my freshman year, and I was sports director for 3 years, and of the radio station. And the first basketball game I announced was in the fall of 1965. I'm sorry. Second semester 1965, beginning of the and it was a Syracuse St. John's game, and Dave Bing was the big star for Syracuse at the time, and there was a guy on the team who was terrific by the name of Jim Boeheim. So the first game I ever announced, Boeheim played in. It's been there ever since, but that's how it all began, and I just enjoyed. I quickly dropped out of engineering, and my father would not let me major in broadcasting. He thought that was a waste of time. So my brother negotiated the deal. My brother had gone to Syracuse, my older brother. He became an accountant and a lawyer, not a broadcaster. He's not Chris Berman. So he negotiated a deal where I could major in English and economics. It was a great deal. And then I could get out of engineering. The economics, he thought, well, everyone needs to deal with the economy and money. It was kind of a total waste because it dealt with economic theory. It didn't go with the practical aspects of investing and saving and all kinds of common sense economic theory. And I majored in English because he figured, well, you got to speak the language. And I had a couple of good courses. I had a debating course I thought was really good. But that's how I didn't go to Newhouse until graduate school. And the story there was I had to kill some time. I had joined the National Guard. This was during the Vietnam era. And I was going to go to active duty, but not until May. So I had nothing to do for a semester. So I started a master's, which is a kind of a weak reason to start a master's degree, just to kill some time. But that's why I got the master's. I don't recommend you have to get a master's. I don't recommend you have to get anything. I knew broadcasters who never went to college who were super successful. So it's just each person has their individual story.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, I get where your father was coming from because he lived through the Great Depression, right? So this is not that far removed from that era where a lot of people were saying, hey, if there's a simple, safe opportunity for financial security, take it. You don't blame, and hindsight's 2020, but for those that lived through that era, and your father's generation certainly was that, you don't blame them. You don't blame them.
Also, he was tangentially involved in the entertainment business. His career was putting out a magazine for people who like to write songs. It was a songwriting magazine called the Songwriters Review. And he wasn't a songwriter himself and couldn't read music, but it was a way to earn a living. So he came in contact with disc jockeys around the country, and he realized that many of them around the country made 12 cents. So his line to me was, when I want to go into broadcast, he said, well, there's only one Walter Cronkite. So that kind of stuck with me. Yeah, I thought in my own head, well, I'll be the only Len Berman, but I never had the guts to say it back to my father. And but that's where he was coming from. He didn't think disc jockeys, made much money, and they didn't. So that's where he was coming from.
Your career on the radio and television too kind of followed a trajectory that a lot of people will take, which is even if they grew up in the surrounding area of a major market. Of course, you grew up in Queens, you grew up in the #1 media market, still the #1 media market to this day. You went around the country, and this is not a knock on Ohio. Certainly, if you work in Cleveland, for example, that's a pretty major market in its own right. You started out in Dayton. I'll get to Boston in a moment before you originally came back with Channel 2 in '79. But going out to Dayton as a news sports reporter during that era, we think of Ohio, we think of the Buckeyes. They're still huge to this day. I mean, obviously, despite the struggles of the franchise, massive fans of the Cleveland Browns, of course, the Cincinnati Bengals over the years, and the Indians once they got good in the 90s. But at that time, what was the pulse of Dayton specifically? I would imagine, besides college basketball, of course, what was the pulse of Dayton, Ohio in terms of?
I had the Dayton Flyers. Well, it was a job. I mean, I had gotten I applied for an internship for a company that doesn't exist anymore called Avco Broadcasting. And they came to Syracuse and said, we have stations in San Francisco, Washington, and the Midwest, and would you like to apply for an internship? I said, wow, yeah, I'd love to spend the summer in San Francisco. So I actually applied, and I won the internship. They made you do stand-ups and read copy and stuff. And I actually won this internship. They said, congratulations, you're going to Dayton, Ohio one summer. And I said, oh. And when I graduated from Syracuse, at that time, there wasn't cable. I mean, that makes me old. But there were 3 major stations in each market. I wrote everyone a letter in the top 50 markets, and didn't hear. I heard from, New Orleans wanted to see a tape, and believe it or not, Channel 2 in New York had me in for an interview. And Channel 2 in New York said, "Well, go get a job in Minneapolis and come back." And I said, "I'd love a job in Minneapolis." I couldn't get anyway, but Dayton brought me back because I'd been an intern one summer. They brought me back to be a newscaster. It was the news department. It wasn't a sports job. I couldn't get a sports job. So I took a news job. I just wanted to do broadcasting.
Right.
So I was a news reporter / anchor. The local talk show at the time, just on in Dayton, you might have heard of it, was the Phil Donahue Show. That was before he went national.
Right.
So it was quite a station and an interesting kind of liberal city. You don't think of Dayton in that respect, but it had many liberal aspects to it. And it was 45 minutes from Cincinnati, and there was a team called the Big Red Machine winning World Series down the pike.
That's right.
And they were in the World Series. They didn't win until I got to Boston, and they beat Boston in '75. But I went down there and covered I covered the World Series. The news sports director of my station in Dayton was also doing some college football on the side, maybe Miami of Ohio. And he couldn't make the World Series, so I went down there. I mean, there weren't 80,000 reporters covering it. I stood on the field, interviewed Sparky Anderson after the game. I mean, that would never happen today. I mean, I was a kid from Ohio. Hey, Sparky, can I do it? Sure, kid. I did it, and I have a picture of it. And that was that was probably the 70. What was the year they lost to the A's? 72, maybe 72 World Series. I remember going down the pike, and so it was, it was something to do. But I was there in Dayton for 3 years, and I kept applying for jobs, and nothing was coming through, and I was getting frustrated. A weekend sports job opens in Cincinnati. I said, "Okay, here we go, perfect." I didn't get the job, so it's a long story, but I got a job in Boston. They still do. It's called Broadcasting Magazine, and there were blind boxes you could apply to jobs. I didn't know where I was applying. It was Boston. They brought me in for an audition, and I said, "Wow, Boston!" I mean, this is the mid '70s. Hockey was king. Warren Esposito would want to.
That's right. Yep. In 1972,
a couple of cups, and Boston didn't win the next championship till '74, which I was kind of involved with. But it was and baseball. I mean, actually, the mid '70s, Boston had the best 4 teams in all the sports, but they didn't win all the championships. I mean, Boston lost the fabulous World Series to the Reds. The Patriots were the best team in football, and they screwed up a game against the Raiders in '76. And the Bruins and Celtics did win championships. But so I got this audition, and I didn't. They brought me back for a second audition, And it came down to two guys, me and a kid from Peoria. And they called me up and said, sorry, we're going to the kid from Peoria. And they called me back a few weeks later and said, well, the kid from Peoria's wife's pregnant, doesn't want to leave town, so you got the job. So that's how I wound up in Boston. I mean, there's a million stories like that in broadcasting.
Right.
You just never know what you're going to fall into. So I actually went to Boston, then wound up doing Celtics games on television. Our station had the rights to it. I worked with Bob Cousy, the great, who's still alive at 95. And had a great time doing that. Did Patriots preseason games on TV. And then after that, I wound up at Channel 2 in New York. But also the other interesting thing was HBO. This was before ESPN existed. HBO did a lot of sports. People don't know that. I mean, they know they did boxing over the years. But Marty Glickman put together the college basketball game of the week on HBO in 1979. And I was the play-by-play guy with Tommy Heinsohn. And the first game we did was Magic Johnson game. And midway through the season, we did a Larry Bird game. So we went all around the country doing college basketball that year. And that was on HBO. And I did boxing for HBO and then wound up getting a weekend sports gig for Channel 2 in New York.
And that brings us to Channel 2. And just to go back to Boston, it's an interesting snapshot because we think, of course, of the Russell dynasty of the 60s. We think, of course, of the Bird years in the 80s. And even into the 90s, once Pedro Martinez got to town and gradually revitalized the Red Sox, even though they wouldn't win until 2004. There's snapshots. But the 70s is often an overlooked period because think about it, even though Russell had long retired, even was no longer a player coach by this point, they did win 2 championships during that decade in 74 and 76. One of the Bruins Cups, I know they had won years prior, was 1972. They won 2. They won one in 1970 and then another one in 1972. So it was, as you said, even if they didn't always win, the Red Sox, even though, of course, the Bucky Dent loss was painful in 76, or excuse me, 75, not 76. The Reds swept the Yankees in 76, was a painful loss in that regard. It was still a glorious period in terms of constant contention. And a lot of major figures. Jim Rice, was around during that period as well. Of course, you mentioned, of course, some of the greats of the Celtics during that era. Bobby Orr was in his prime, perhaps the best defenseman to ever, step on the rink for sure. So I imagine getting there to transition from that, coming back home in 79, the state of sports in 79 is interesting because the glory years of the Knicks have kind of faded. This is that little period of time in between Monroe and, of course, Clyde Frazier. Bernard King hadn't quite gotten there yet. This is well before Patrick Ewing. The Rangers now have Phil Esposito and a young guy named Ron Duguay at this time, so they're doing pretty good. They make the Cup final in 79. The Yankees are kind of going a little bit into a bit of a decline. They make the LCS in 80, series in 81. Reggie's still there, but this is the year, and I don't know if you were, if you got there after or before. This is the year Thurman Munson died. So being in New York in 79 when such an icon and a pillar of the franchise died in such a tragic way at the far too young age of 32, what was it like to be covering sports and covering a franchise like the Yankees during one of its darkest times?
It was interesting. One of the first times I walked in the clubhouse, Munson was sitting there playing cards. And he looked up and glared at me. So I figured that was hello. Munson hated the media. Turned out that his teammates loved him. It was pretty much an act. I remember standing right outside the dugout, and Thurman Munson runs out of the dugout. I wouldn't even dare ask him for an interview. Tell me to go F myself probably. But some kid comes up to him and said, "Hey, Thurm, I'm from Columbia University." And Munson says, "Great," and keeps running right by him. And that was Thurm. I wound up getting to know his widow, Diana, and his family, son, Michael, very well, because I hosted the Thurman Munson Awards dinner for years. So I got to know his family very well and got to know him tangentially. Again, as I said, his teammates loved him. But when he passed, I took a camera into the stands. They came back and played a game. Famous Bobby Mercer game. Reggie's crying in right field. First game back, they left home plate empty for the opening introductions. And I had a camera in the stands when they were doing a moment of silence, and people were crying. I don't know if you've ever seen the footage. It was my footage because, most cameras were trained on the field. I always had this thing of training the camera on the crowd. It was sad. it was brutally awful at that time. And the Yankees, they did get to the World Series in '81 and lost to the Dodgers. And unless my brain is failing me, they didn't get back till what, 96?
96. They didn't get to the playoffs again until 95, because a quick aside on that. So they're coming off back-to-back titles in 77 and 78. They beat the Dodgers in 6 both times. 79, they didn't make it because this is obviously well before the DS was created. 80, they get swept by the Royals in the LCS, I believe, and then 81, they get back. And that was the only season, because if you remember, there was the strike that split the season in two. We had a division series in 1981, which wouldn't come back until 95. And it's funny, and I'll get to WNBC in a moment, but especially looking back on the Don Mattingly years and some of the years he played with Ricky Henderson, some of those Yankee teams won 96, 97 games, and they went home. There was no wild card back then.
I love Don. Donnie was one of my faves. I mean, I really got to know him pretty well, and I just loved the guy. He was just such class through and through. I think he got there the year after they were in the playoffs, and left the year before they got the playoffs. I mean, that was his stretch. So Donnie was great. But, it was interesting times covering the Yankees. The big thing is the Islanders won. And they won 4 straight, so that became a big deal, at least for me, because I was living on Long Island. I don't think they cared in Manhattan, because for the Rangers, of course. But those were special. Those are special teams with special players, Trottier and Bossi and Billy Smith and Nystrom and on and on and on.
Potvin.
Those were great. Yeah, they were great teams, and they had dynasty for 4 years. They won. I remember going to the Islanders parade on Hempstead Turnpike, where the players were on the back of flatbed trucks, and there were 27 people cheering. I brought my kids to the parade. That was a good time.
Absolutely. And, again, even me as a diehard Rangers fan, credit where it's due. You have not seen anything like that in the sport of hockey before or since. And there's been some successful teams. Certainly some can point to the Red Wings teams of the late 90s and early 2000s that won 3 Stanley Cups, or the Colorado Avalanche teams of that era that did the same. But to win 4 straight in a sport where it's a little bit more randomized in the playoffs, even then, and I don't think you're going to see anything like that again. It was a different sport back then.
Yeah, I don't think the Panthers are going to win 4 in a row. They're not going to make the playoffs this year, are they?
Well, listen, they're in contention for a wild card spot. But yeah, even then, right, to your point, they've won back-to-back. They've been to 3. They've been to the last 3. They've won the last 2. Yeah. But even then, it's hard, which makes you, from a fan perspective, giving credit, it makes you really tip your cap. 82 is when the longest assignment of your career takes shape. You spent 27 years at NBC, and that journey started in 82. Yeah. You have a pretty good gig at Channel 2, but what made you jump to Channel 4?
Well, they offered me a network job. They hired me to replace Brian Gumbel on NFL 82, and I stayed with the network for 4 years. So I hosted 1 Super Bowl, co-hosted 1 World Series, and while I was there, a guy who sat next to me at Channel 2 by the name of Jerry Naquin, who's since passed. He was a great reporter and wound up being a great executive at many stations around the country. He was a news director at Channel 4 and said, you got to do the sports news for us. So I started filling in for Marv Albert, because Marv was always doing games and somewhere on assignment. So I became Marv's fill-in. And then when Marv packed it in 86, they hired me to replace him. So that's how that transition took place. So I was there from 82 to 2009.
Yep.
Whatever it was, something like that. You have better facts than I do. It's all a blur,
Listen, there was a lot that you got to cover during that time. I'll get back to the World Series and the Super Bowl in a moment, but just on the Olympic level, it's funny because one of the segments you did was spanning the world. What better example than, of course, the Olympics? Being there to see these games play out on a global stage at both the winter level and the summer level. How cool was that for you?
It was very cool because I didn't get the prime assignments because, I wasn't a big Olympic star, but I covered minor events that I thought were sensational. I mean, I covered ski jumping one year. I covered biathlon one year. All these were fast, and people dedicated their lives. I mean, biathlon is one of the most amazing sports. I don't know how they do it. They race. They didn't have to stop, slow their heart rate down, and shoot a rifle. Now, who decided? Well, it comes from, people in the military. If you lived in a Scandinavian country, you would be on ski patrol with your rifle. I mean, that's where the sport originated from. And it was an amazing sport. I remember doing a story about team handball, which is one of the most bizarre sports you'll ever see. It was the first, again, another weird coincidence. The first Olympics I get to is 2000. I was there locally in 96. I worked for the network in 2000. They assigned me to show you how low I was in the totem pole. They assigned me to do sideline interviews at rowing, which was not the big ticket item when it came to the rating. But what happened was the guy who was assigned to do the interviews at wrestling had a family issue, and he went home, and I was assigned to Greco-Roman wrestling, and I had no idea what that was. And the first night I'm there, the president of NBC is sitting in the stands, and so is Henry Kissinger. I said, gee, I don't know, this must be. Turns out there was a guy from Wyoming by the name of Rulon Gardner, made it to the finals, and he's doing Greco-Roman wrestling against a guy who hasn't lost in 13 years, by the name of Alexander Karelin from Russia. And somehow Gardner wins. He wins the gold medal.
Wow.
And this aw-shucks guy from Wyoming, he was a dairy farmer, wins the gold. Biggest, they call it the miracle on the mat. Other than the miracle on ice, they called it the biggest upset in Olympic history. And it was my job to interview him. Now, during the meetings at NBC, they told us, here's the question you never ask. How do you feel? So what else did I want to know, really, from this guy? I didn't want to hear the intricacies of Greco-Roman wrestling. He won on some technicality by 1 point because the clinch was broken, and whatever it was. And no one cared. But all I want to know is how he felt. So I asked him 7 different ways. What does this mean to you? Did you think you had a chance? And finally, after about the 7th attempt, he went just like this. Yeah, it's kind of awesome. That's how he answered. And that was my first experience, which was huge. They played that interview on a Today Show. It was a big deal. So that was my first experience. And I really enjoyed it. I did Sydney in 2000, Salt Lake in 2002. 04 was Athens, which was a couple of years after 9/11. And really, a lot of people didn't want to go. They thought the Greek and they wouldn't have the security. A lot of people didn't show up. In 2006, I did Torino, the Italian Olympics. And those are the ones I covered for NBC. I loved it. I thought the Olympics were sensational. Your whole mindset is Olympics, which is great because, especially nowadays, you go through the world and, everyone's got an issue and the world's in turmoil. But you got to the Olympics as they did this year, and all of a sudden you're focused on a hockey game, which I thought was tremendous, which I loved.
Yeah, both tournaments, the men's and the women's, was great. Oh, yeah. It was great drama, great theater. All of it. Yeah, absolutely. Getting back, and I'll. You mentioned 9/11. I'll get to that and covering sports in the aftermath of that in a moment. But let's talk about, because we were talking about in the beginning with John, right? When you walk into WNBC at that time, John, I think, came a little bit later, but Chuck's there, Scarborough, that is. Sue Simmons is there. And that's just some of the personalities that, you got the chance to work alongside over the course of those years. So when it came to and then this is just focusing on the early part, that can be intimidating because already these individuals are regarded at such a high stature within the context of New York City news. What was it like to be in their presence, work with them, and learn from them?
I kind of had a good experience from Channel 2. That's going to blow your mind when I tell you who was at Channel 2 doing the local news. When I was there, 79 to 82, some of the people doing the local news, I'll tick them off for you. Bill O'Reilly, Lester Holt, Meredith Vieira, John Stossel. The big anchorman was Jim Jensen.
Yes.
And Roland Smith and Dave Marish. And the first anchorman I worked with the first time I was on the air was John Tesh, the guy who wrote the NBA thing.
Right.
He wanted to be a news anchorman. I mean, the number of people who worked there were and that was just the local news. So I got to Channel 4. I was kind of used to that this is New York City and there's going to be some big stars. So I wasn't as intimidated as you might think. And I was pretty confident by then. I'd been through Boston 5 years doing the sports news, and I'd been through 3 years at Channel 2. So by the time I got to Channel 4, I was feeling pretty good. Maybe too good, but I was feeling pretty good about, I think I could do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And at least having that confidence and comfort level and not that, oh, shucks, deer in the headlight thing which is natural when somebody's new. goes a long way, because at least the person, whoever it is at the desk, can kind of look at the side and say, okay, I know this person. I know I can depend on this person. They'll keep the broadcast running smoothly, because you're speaking in sound bites. Even back then, which was a different era for news, to say the least, you're still speaking in sound bites. So getting these stories out, getting the impact points across, but getting it in such a manner that is not only getting the impact points across, but in a timely fashion, it's an art form. And if you can do that successfully, it doesn't matter who you are. The news anchors certainly appreciate that.
Well, it really helped me too. It was weird. They had a weird anchor desk. They would have Chuck Shermer and Sue Simmons sitting up front, and in the back they had myself and Al Roker, who was the weather guy. So
right.
Al and I had our own little. So when I started Spanning the World, which was my version of monthly goofy highlights,
right,
I was sitting there laughing, and there was no greater soundtrack or greater pal to have. I mean, I credit Al Roker for making that a success. His belly laugh was, he was my Ed McMahon. I mean, we started this thing, nobody got hurt. And we would show this highlight, and if someone, something happened, they fell or whatever, we would say, and nobody got hurt. Well, Al turned it into, we would chant it together, and nobody got hurt. And Al would yell it out with me, and he became, and then that progressed to the Today Show in 1989. They invited me onto the Today Show, which I did for 25 years, monthly offbeat highlights, and Al was there too. Great soundtrack. So yeah, it was it was big. I mean, the ratings at that time were huge on the local news. Now the ratings on local newscasts are kind of minuscule. There's so many other choices. So many people watch the cable news networks, which weren't a factor when I was working at Channel 4.
Right, and even streaming now too has changed the game completely.
Yeah, and your podcasts are screwing everything up.
Sorry.
All right.
And even it's not even just the blooper stories, although I think Shaquille O'Neal owes you royalties because he took Shaq and a fool just for the NBA lowlights and turned it into his own thing. So I think Shaq's got to get Len Berman some royalties. Even if it wasn't intended as a blooper story, some of the stories you did were hilarious. This is on YouTube. You got to, for those of you out there, you got to find it. John Olerud, one of the most underrated players the sport of baseball has ever seen. Hell of a
batting championship.
Yeah. Yep, he sure did. I think in '98. Great Met, ended up leaving after the 99 season to go play in Seattle, which is where he was from originally, and did great over there too. He was, again, a star from the standpoint of we saw what he did on the field, but nobody really knew him outside of that. And one of the funny stories you did in 1997, young up-and-coming Mets team that went 88-74 with Bobby V's first full year at the helm. He's taking the subway to Met games.
He did. Yeah, he was taking the subway to the game, and no one knew who he was.
Yeah.
I mean, he wears uniform on the train.
No.
And we would always look for the different story because, it was, you didn't want to just do the highlights. You just, because you wanted to go out, it sounds corny, but you wanted to, do something more. You wanted to, drag the audience in. Also, here's the other thing that was very, very important to me throughout my career is when there was a general manager in Boston who showed me the statistics. He said, what percentage of the people watching the 11 o'clock news in Boston are sports fans? This is Boston. The number was like 30-something%. So, which meant the majority of people watching the local news are not sports fans. And just, and I looked around and I said, well, my mom isn't really a sports fan. My dad, not really. My wife, nah, except for when tennis comes around. And my brother, so. And I looked around the people I knew, and they're right. My uncle was not a sports fan. Most people weren't sports fans. So I intentionally would try to tailor my broadcast to the non-sports fan. I used to jokingly call it sports for the sports impaired. And I would, my mom was watching every night. So I never would start a sentence, Tom Coughlin. I never started a sentence. Tom Coughlin said, I would always go, Giants coach Tom Coughlin. That's a little thing. It's a minor thing. But at least my mother would know who the hell this guy was. So that's how I always, and I never did cliches. That came from Marty Glickman. Marty Glickman, the great, said, speak English. You never hear a football player in a locker room say, look at me, I'm toting my pigskin to pay dirt. People don't talk like that. I carried the ball. I scored a touchdown. I got 6, whatever. So I never use cliches. I tried to bring people in who are not sports fans. So I think they asked me what the secret to it all, the secret sauce. Although I thought those were primary ingredients to it.
I'll get back to television in a moment, but I wanted to transition back into radio because in the
Yeah.
90s, interesting time frame here where the radio presents a different nuance. Certainly anybody that's done both can attest to this. For example, a guy like Warner Wolf, same thing. He did both. And you look at a guy like Gary Cohen, you look at a guy like Michael Kay, Mike Breen, same thing. They understand the nuance of both. If you ever listen to play-by-play or even just a talk show that Michael Kay, John Sterling, any of the guys I just mentioned did on the radio versus how they do it now on television, you'll notice the subtle differences. FAN exploded in the 80s because that was a dynamis effect. You know, it was on 1050. Once WNBC went under, 660 became FAN signal. And when they inherited the I-Man, obviously his popularity being what it was, things skyrocketed. And then they created a little show at 89 called Mike and the Mad Dog, which made things even more popular for the signal. So around that time frame, I think it was, 92, 93, you got to FAN?
93, yeah.
93.
Well, what happened was they came to me and said, would you like to do a midday talk show? And I always wanted to do radio. I mean, that's how I started in college. I always fancied myself. I used to listen when I was a kid to this guy named Gene Shepard. You may never have heard of him from old radio days. And he would just go on the radio and talk. And I thought that was unbelievable. Now it sounds silly, but people do that all the time. He would just talk. He would tell stories. I remember him saying on the air once, gee, if I had to pick someone to storm the enemy bunker with me in World War II, I'd pick a Chicago White Sox fan because they've known death all their lives. And I just blew my mind. Absolutely. I was a kid at the time. And so anyway, I always wanted to do a talk thing. So I agreed to co-host with Mike Lupica. I don't know what it was. Maybe could have been 4 hours.
Yeah,
2 hours.
I think you guys were 10-2 at that time.
Supposed to be 10-2.
Yeah.
Well, as soon as I signed it, my wife said, what the hell have you done? Because I was still doing the 6 to 11 o'clock news. So it was kind of, I don't know why I lost my mind. So I called up the general manager, a fellow by the name of Joel Hollander.
Yep.
And I told him, I made a big mistake. I'm sorry. I can't commit. And his boss, who I don't want to get into, basically said, screw him. He signed a contract. So I had to go on the air, but they cut me a break. And they gave Lupica 2 hours, and I did the 2 hours from 12 to 2, which I absolutely love, but it was still hell on my schedule. Oh, so when I tried to get out of the contract, Don Imus goes on the air and just kills me, on his show.
Yeah.
And at one point, he was calling me Lenny the Jew. And one of his characters did it in a German accent, which Imus later claimed, it was Austrian accent. He was basically full of it. So I took great offense to it. Actually called my local rabbi, and what do you mean, Lenny the Jew in a German accent? What's that all about? So the very first minute on WFAN, they put me with Lupica for one show just to get us introduced. And on the air, I said Imus was anti-Semitic. On his radio station,
right?
All hell broke loose.
Mm.
It became the front and back page of the New York Daily News, and it became quite a controversy. And I stand by it. He claims, as I said, it was an Austrian accent. He was full of it, and so I did 2 hours. They let me out after time off for good behavior. I think that's summer. I think I started in February or March and got off by the summer. They let me out, but that's not to say I didn't love doing it. I remember debating Dershowitz on the air. On the air, I'm debating a lawyer of his quality. He was defending Mike Tyson. And,
that's right.
Mike Tyson was accused of rape.
Yep.
And he claimed that the woman had lied in the past. So I, who never took a law course, said just because she lied that time didn't mean she was lying this time. And I'm debating Dershowitz on the air. I remember I ran into Marvin Hamlish, the late great composer, The Way We Were, chorus line. He was a big Yankee fan. Ran into him at a party. I said, call me on the radio show sometime. And he did. And he called it. And I'm talking to Marvin Hamlish. I remember interviewing Sampras on the radio show. I'd never met Sampras. And I'm interviewing on the radio. I said, wow, this is a cool gig. But I couldn't do both. So it wasn't until I basically retired from television. I got a gig on WR Radio, which was a news show. It wasn't even a sports show. So I enjoyed it. I think radio is a great medium, and too bad it's not doing as well as especially AM, they say isn't doing well. Too bad. Obviously the podcasts are killing them. FM's killing them. Everything's killing everyone. Everyone's got a small slice of the pie.
If you look at it back then, and that was the thing too, you look at, and I've had the good fortune to interview Mike Lupica on this program a number of years ago before. Any other,
just as an aside, Lupica basically stopped talking to me after I said that on the air with him.
Oh, well, he was tight with Imus.
But he was tight with Imus. Imus got mad at him for not coming to his defense. Yeah. Lupica basically, he'll say hello to me. That's about it. I mean, he just basically shut me down because of that. But anyway, go ahead. You were saying.
Right. No, and I get it. And back then, I mean, listen, I was a fan of Don Imus. I wish I would have interviewed him on this program before he passed away. But him, like many other individuals known as the shock jocks of that era, you had him. You had certainly Howard Stern later on in the latter half of the 90s. You had Opie and Anthony. They were known to push the envelope with things that even back then compared to today, you would have people go, like, oh my God, they said that. And that was one of those things that, and again, I was a huge Don Imus fan, but that was in poor taste for sure. And I don't
cross the line. Listen, I got to know Stern very well. I thought he was great. I never, I understood more about the art form, and I realized most of it was shtick. And then I realized, off air, he was kind of a shy guy, Howard, and a great interviewer. And he had me on his show several times to do various bits with him. And he put out a boxing match called Scrapple of the Apple. He had a TV show at the time. It was TV and radio. Yeah. And he had Geraldo Rivera fighting Stallone's brother, Frank Stallone. And I was calling a play-by-play. We get on the air. The very first thing Stern says is, who has the bigger penis, you or Marv Albert? That's the very first thing out of his mouth. And I just, like an idiot, clamped up. And for years, I wish I had thought to say, I don't know, but his is a lot older than mine. But I choked.
Yeah,
I choked out the air.
Oh boy, yeah, no, and that was a midday slot, where for a long time, that was the thing with WFAN. They had Imus in the morning. That was their cash cow, especially once he started simulcasting on MSNBC in '96. They had Mike and the Mad Dog in the afternoon. Midday until Joe and Evan came around and held it down for so many years was a slot they couldn't quite seem to fill. Getting back to television. Again, this and I want to hit on some of your books too, as we'll talk about, particularly the 25 greatest players of all time. The 90s proved to be a great decade because even the teams that did not win made very, very deep runs into the postseason. Yet you started off the decade with the Giants Super Bowl victory, Norwood Wide Right. The Rangers and the Knicks in the spring of 94. The Rangers finally breaking the 54-year drought and winning with Mark Messier leading the charge and Brian Leach having a hell of a playoff run. We get the Yankee dynasty in 1996, and that goes all the way through 01. And even with, like I said, with the teams that didn't win, Subway Series in 2000. Of course, we get the Jets making an AFC championship run 2 years after going 1-15 under Kotite. They're in the AFC championship game in 98. That was a great decade. So I want to go to the spring of 94 in particular, not to go over Norwood Wide Right. That was a great victory, especially with Phil Simms missing and Hofstetler coming in. That spring, that was an incredible spring. What was that like?
It was phenomenal because we had the NBA games on NBC, but my boss was really into it. So I flew back and forth to every finals game the Knicks were in. And then we were covering the Rangers in between. I didn't go to Vancouver, but I was covering in between. And people ask all the time, what was the greatest sports moment? Because we had championships, the Yankee dynasty, and we had the Rangers won, and the Giants won a couple, and the Islanders and all. But the greatest thing to me was the '94 Rangers. I mean, I just thought that was the greatest moment because the year before, Montreal won the cup. Last time a Canadian team has won the cup.
Yep.
1993. And they rioted in Montreal. They broke windows on St. Catherine Street. And they said, oh, just wait. If New York ever wins the Stanley Cup, they'll burn the town down. And it was June 14th, 94. There was nothing. There was not one single arrest. It was the most peaceful night. It was wonderful. And I remember walking into the press room, the celebration's still going on the ice. And I'm backstage at the press room. And Brian Leach is talking to the media. And just then, President Clinton calls him. And I'm saying, this is an out-of-body experience. This is unbelievable. And Clinton's calling, congratulations, Brian. I watched the game. It played great. Whatever. I mean, very, very, especially since they hadn't won in 54 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I did go to Ranger games as a kid, and I was special. And obviously the Yankees dynasty was huge too, but that was the spring of '94 was unbelievable. And then the Rangers win their cup, and the Knicks are up 3-2 going back to Houston. And of course, they lose Game 6, and Game 7, John Starks is still trying to hit a basket. And I love that story, by the way. New Yorkers love John Starks.
I do too.
I mean, if the ball rolled through his legs the way it did Buckner's, he'd be chased out of New York or chased out of Boston the way Buckner was. People love John Starks. And I love that story. The fact, kept shooting, kept missing, but they love him. And I think that shows you what New York sports is all about. They admired the effort. I always said that. I remember when Steve Sachs joined the Yankees. I sat down with him, a very nice fellow, and he invited me to his home in spring training. We did an interview, and he said, "Well, tell me about doing sports in New York." I said, "Just try, just give me your best, and the fans will love you." Mm-hmm. And Steve Sachs had throwing issues. I don't know if you remember all that.
He had the yips. Yep.
Yeah, but they still admired him because I think he never made excuses, and he tried his best. And I think that's the key to being successful in New York. Hey, give it your all. Don't be a wise guy. Don't be a whatever. Don't make excuses. Don't go hide in the trainer's room. Be up front, be a man, and try your best. And I think that's the key.
Yeah, even Chuck Malblock with all his yips. If Yankee fans look back on Malblock fondly, despite that, because for as much as he may have struggled defensively, although once he went to the outfield, he was fine. How many clutch hits did that guy have in the postseason? Yeah. You remember his home run off Kevin Brown, I believe. Might have been Kevin Brown. If not, I think it was Donnie Wall in Game 1 of the '98 World Series to tie it. And then a year later, hits a clutch 2-run game-tying homer off Tom Glavine in Game 3. So whatever he couldn't do in the field, he tried his best. Like you said, he made up for it with his bat. And you ask Yankee fans about Malblock now, they love the guy.
Yeah, no, it's true. That's really a key. They don't like dogs. They like guys who give it their best. I think that's it.
Yeah, and to your point on Starks has said, because if you recall Game 6, which I think the Rockets won 86-84, John had the hot hand in that game. Unlike Game 7, John was actually shooting the ball really well that night. He has since said that when he let that shot go, that Hakeem just got his fingertips on to get a piece of it. He said, as soon as I let it go, I knew it was money. If anybody else had been standing there and not Hakeem, he says to this day that shot would have went in and the Knicks would have won the championship that night.
Yeah, I believe him.
Yeah, I believe him too. Great Nick, and a great story too for those that don't know John Starks.
And you go watch the dunk over Jordan if you
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. I will hit on your books in a moment, but just another quick aside here. So again, we talked about it at the beginning of the program. You grew up in an era briefly where we had 3 baseball teams in New York. And of course, 2 of them relocated. We get the Mets in '62, wasn't pretty in the beginning. The Miracle of '69, of course, again in '86. And in 1998, the tide begins to change. Really 97, like I said, Bobby V comes in. They get Oldroyd. They get Piazza a year later in '98. They add Al Leiter that same year. And after a hell of a run in 1999, where there was a point in time where they almost collapsed and didn't make the playoffs, they come right back with another solid year. This time it's Todd Zeile in place of Oldroyd. And, they take care of the Cardinals in the LCS. The Yankees get through Seattle. Wasn't the strongest of the dynasty teams for the Yankees. They struggled in September. But for the first time since 1956, we have a Subway Series in New York. So for an old-time baseball fan like you, what was that like to cover?
It was the best because I was interviewed. I remember being interviewed by ESPN, and they said, they only care in New York. They don't care around the country. And I said, I could care less. I live in New York. I thought it was just. I sat there in the stands for one of the games. I looked out and I said, "These are the Mets playing the Yankees." I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was like it was a dream come true. I really was pulling for the Mets. I mean, I was a lifelong Yankee fan, but I had lost my fandom once I worked in Ohio with the Reds and Boston with the Red Sox. So I said, come on, I want the Mets to get a break here. Come on. Yeah, but it wasn't to be. I mean, the Yankees still had it going. So, I felt bad about that.
Series.
Yeah, it was good. Oh, 5 games, right?
5 close games, and even the fly ball Piazza hit. I think to this day, if Piazza hits that ball to any other part of the park off Mariano, it ties the game. But he hit it to the deepest part of the park, and Bernie caught it. The next year, and we'll hit on a few more things because I don't want to keep you too long. September 11th happens. And
Yeah.
after that, we had, again, it was a time of healing and grappling with the time of tremendous loss. And it affected everybody, whether you knew somebody who died in the World Trade Center or not. That being said, the Mets come back 10 days later. Piazza hits that iconic home run off Carsey. And then we get an incredible Yankee run where I remember having Roger Clemens on this show a little while ago. Those 3 games, one of which he pitched and pitched phenomenal. And of course, the Tino and Brocious games back to back. Where does that rank amongst the greatest games you've ever seen?
Well, they were good. Greatest games. I don't know about that. The biggest thing for me in that World Series was W throwing out the first ball. I wasn't a Republican, but I just thought that was sensational that the President of the United States walked on the field and threw a strike. And I thought that was a great moment. Those were great games. But obviously, remember Game 7, I think, was also the New York City Marathon. I think I had to work that instead of going to Game 7 in Arizona. That was a great series. But I lived through the 75 World Series, which was before you were born. Red Sox and Reds, which I thought, to me, was the greatest World Series. Everyone has their own perspective. But, it's interesting that the Yankees lost in 01 and 03 and won in 09 and haven't won since. So, yeah.
Don't remind me.
That's sports, all right?
It is. Now, in regards to your books, which I will hit on now, and then we'll get to the rapid fire. Like I said, I promised I wouldn't keep you too long. We're not going to go through every single moment talking about the greatest moments in sports, but to curate that, narrow it down to your list, and then see the result of it, which is becoming a New York Times bestseller. It's a feather in your cap, one of many, to not only put that book out with the stress of curating it, but to see the results of it in terms of how it was able to sell. What does it mean to you?
Well, it meant a lot because it was supposed to be a kid's book and supposedly for kids 9 and up and whatever. And really, the adults liked it. They did a nice job putting it together. I didn't rank the 25 greatest moments. And clearly, it was an American bias. To me, I didn't rank 1 through 25, but I said at the end, the greatest moment in American sports was the Miracle on Ice. I just went out and said it. I'm sure that's not the greatest moment in sports if you live in Russia. So, obviously, there's a certain bias to one of the greatest moments in sports. But that was fun putting that together because I don't think there was a lot of argument about what the big argument came with the baseball book, the 25 greatest baseball players of all time. So I intentionally hired a blue ribbon panel to do the picking for me so I wouldn't be found guilty. But if I told you the list of people who are not in the 25 greatest, you'll think I'm crazy. And we need another book, but Sandy Koufax, Roy Campanella, they're not in the group. It's like whatever city you went to pitch the book. You go to Detroit, they say, "Where's Al Kaline?" No, didn't make it. You go to Baltimore, "Where's Brooksy?" No, Frank Robinson made it, not Brooksy. So when you get to the pyramid of the top 25, and now maybe you'd add change a few. You got to consider Trout and Ohtani as 2 great ball players. At least they get consideration. But I had a blue ribbon panel which consisted of journalists and former ball players and executives. So, I actually had Ralph Frank, who was on that. Bernie Williams of the Yankees was one of my voters. Chris Mad Dog Russo was one of my panels. And the feeling on Koufax was always causes the greatest argument. Because if you had to pick one pitcher to pitch the 7th game of the World Series, you pick Koufax. But the argument was it was too short a career. So the pitchers who did make it were Cy Young and Walter Johnson, Christy Mathewson, clearly greats. Warren Spahn, winningest lefty of all time, Bob Gibson, Bob Feller. So, those are some pretty strong pitchers. And if you want to make the argument that Koufax better than 1 or 2 of them, you probably could. So I declare it's not my fault. Don't blame me. I had a blue ribbon panel.
The only question I'll ask you pertaining to that book, and either way, it doesn't matter to me. You're free to feel how you feel about it. And I'm sure you've had this question asked to you 1,000 times, so here's 1,001. When it comes to the guys with the heavy links to steroid use, like a Barry Bonds, how do you personally feel in terms of ranking a guy like that in the top 10, top 5?
Okay. Well, I put Rose in the book. He wasn't a steroid guy. Alex Rodriguez made the book, believe it or not. And he was a steroid guy. My personal feeling on steroids is you have to make a decision based on what you've seen and what you know. Would this guy have been a Hall of Famer without steroids?
Yeah.
And for me, the Hall of Famers without steroids are Clemens and Bonds and I'm leaving someone out.
Anyway, Rod.
Hey, Rod. So those are the Hall of Famers without steroid. Now, is Mark McGuire or Sammy Sosa? I mean,
Borderline at best.
Yeah, so all of the other group, all the people who have done great. You have to ask yourself, would they be in the Hall of Fame without steroids? So that's where I come down when I vote. That. So listen, I said from day one, Rose should have been in the Hall of Fame, and I think that Bonds and A-Rod and Clemens deserve to be in the Hall of Fame as well. But hey, listen, it's the sports writers, and the sports writers, carry the mantle of the torch of baseball, and they got pissed off at Rose because he lied to them all those years and didn't tell the truth till he wrote a book. So they got doubly pissed off, not only for gambling, and now look at the irony of gambling, which now runs the
It's
sport.
everywhere. It's everywhere. And imagine telling, if you can take a time machine back to '89 when Rose got banned, imagine telling him what the sport was going to be, and not just his sport, all sports were going to be in 35 years.
How about the fact that Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays were banned from baseball because they worked at a casino in Atlantic City as a greeter? They banned them from baseball. I mean, come on, look what's anyway. But that times have changed. So that's how I feel. That's it.
Absolutely. We'll get to the rapid fire now, and we will do so after a word from our friends over at Granite State. Hey there, firefighters and fire buffs. If you're tuning in to the Mike to New Haven podcast, you know the value of reliable gear. At Granite State Fire Helmets, we're proud to introduce the TL2, our premium leather Phoenix fire helmet. The TL2 is all about comfort, durability, and that timeless style you trust. And here's the best part. All in-stock inventory usually ships within 24 hours, so you'll have it in your hands in no time. Plus, our company is proudly owned and operated by firemen, so you know we've got your back and understand exactly what you need out there on the front lines. So don't wait. Gear up with the TL2 today. Granite State Fire Helmets, where tradition meets innovation, and where firemen have you covered. Now, we'll switch up the segment a little bit just because some of these questions are in the course of our conversation this last hour you've already answered, so I don't want to sound redundant in nature. So the first question, the rapid fire that I'll ask.
How's this work? Is this like yes, no?
Yeah, hit and run. But if you take your time with an answer, I don't care. We're not strict here, Len. Don't worry. If you could go back in time and cover an athlete, any athlete from any sport that you didn't get the chance to cover over the course of... No, come on.
He's Mr. Baseball. He's one of the 25 greatest baseball players of all time, if not number one.
Greatest game, second question, the rapid fire. Greatest game you wish you could have seen live, but you didn't get a chance to.
Well, I would go with Don Larson's perfect game. Or the 58 championship game. I listened to it on the radio. We blacked out in New York. Here's the championship game. That's the overtime game against the Colts. Alan Nemici's winning touchdown, 1958. It's blacked out in New York because they didn't televise home games. So, yeah, I'd kind of like to see that one.
Third question, and it could be something just pertaining not only from a humor standpoint, but getting to the soul of a matter in terms of telling the story of a person. When you look back, and I'm sure there's many, so if you say multiple, that's fine. What's a story you're proudest of having told?
Wow. Why do you ask such tough questions? The story I am proudest to have ever told. I can't think of one. Give me a hint. You got any suggestions? I don't.
Listen, if you want to come back to that one, you could say pass if you want. You want to pass on that one?
Well, that Rulon Gardner story that was really good. But
there you go.
The Olympian with the wrestling. I'm sure there's others, but go ahead.
No, listen, that's more than fine. It's more than fine. After a long day, this is a more lighthearted one. After a long day of broadcasting, you want to grab a bite to eat somewhere in the city. What's your go-to spot, or what was your go-to spot to stop at?
I was in my car before the closing credits were done, and I was driving home to Long Island. So I did not. I just wanted to go home, and I had the shortest route to the Midtown Tunnel, and I was out of there. So no, I didn't. The people at NBC would go to Hurley's Bar, which I think has since been shut down, but that's where they'd head out. So occasionally we would go there, but by and large, I was out the door.
Yeah, makes sense. Hey, especially with the commute like that and the New York City traffic. I don't blame you. And there's plenty of great spots to eat on Long Island as well. Fifth and final question of the rapid fire. Even now, like you kind of alluded to it, podcasts have changed the game. Radio is not what it used to be. And even television has changed significantly in the recent years as things have changed in terms of technology. And now with AI, forget about it. But even then, it still means something because there's still moments that mean something. So rather it be through the printed word like Sports Illustrated, or rather be through mediums like this podcast or even television, what does storytelling still mean to you in 2026? And for those that are currently in the field, what advice would you give to them?
Well, I think storytelling is everything. Story, story, story. I remember, I don't know if you remember the great movie critics Siskel and Ebert.
Yes. Gene Siskel, Roger Ebert. Yes.
I once sat on the plane with Gene Siskel coming home from Chicago. Yeah, lovely man. I turned out his wife worked in the newsroom at Channel 2 when I was there. And we were talking, and I said to him, I just don't get special effects. And I was never a big special effects guy. I loved the first Star Wars movie. Who didn't? But I just wasn't really into special effects. And and he looked at me and he just said, story, story, story. And I think it involves everything that we do in the medium, in newspaper, podcast, radio, story. You got to have a story. It's the story that grips people. And I think the advice to young people is that keep doing what you believe in. If you want to be on television, go on television. Don't get scared off. But you got to be able to communicate. You got to, one-on-one, most of the time, you got to be able to tell a story. You got to be able to deliver. You got to be able to, be compelling in a way. You just can't give the scores and say that's a sportscast. My one, and I've been fighting this since day one, is the news departments that think that people aren't tuning into the local news for sports. I've been fighting that forever. So, they want sports to watch ESPN. I say, no, they won't. You got to sit through an hour of Sports Center to find out about your local team for 1 minute. No, I mean, if and as I said earlier about treating sports for the non-sports fan, if you make it interesting, if you make it compelling, if you find an offbeat moment, that makes a good sportscast, not necessarily getting the scores right. So, I don't know, a little bit of philosophy there.
I love it. Thank you very much. Stick around. I'll talk to you briefly off air. Before I say goodbye to the audience who will hear this episode Friday, if you have any shout outs to anyone or anything you'd like to give, Len, go right ahead.
How about my wife, Jill?
That's nice.
Yeah. Is that all you want?
Whatever you want to say. If you want to make it longer, shorter. I mean, Jill, hey, she deserves a shout out.
Now, I will tell you, last week I ran into Keith Hernandez at a restaurant in Florida. Hey. I hadn't seen him in a while, and we took a picture together. I can't believe how it resonates with people. It got like 1,500 likes on Twitter, X, whatever. And I just, it was really cool seeing him. That's shout out to Keith. Good guy. Hope they win another championship in our lifetime.
And shout out to Jill. Thanks for letting me steal your husband this morning / early afternoon. I certainly appreciate your patience with me, Mrs. Berman. Len, like I said, Len, stick around. I'll talk to you briefly. We'll say our goodbyes off the air. Like I said, this is being pre-recorded. You're going to get this on Friday at 6 p.m. So it'll be episode 410. At the time I'm doing this, I'll be live tomorrow, Wednesday night, for what'll be volume 23 of our miniseries, The Beat: Profiles of Police Nationwide. Guy's a college professor in retirement, also an author. I have his book right next to me. Was a correctional officer, a court officer before deciding he wanted to take on an even greater challenge. So he became a trooper with the New York State Police. That's my friend Terrence Dwyer, who'll be here Wednesday live, 6 p.m. for volume 23 of The Beat: Profiles of Police Nationwide. In the meantime, on behalf of Len Berman, I'm Mike Colón, and this has been episode 410 of the Mike New Haven podcast. We will see you next time. Take care, everybody, and stay safe.